over here, right, David Williams and Matt Lucas were cancelled for doing blackface, you know, but others weren't. There's many others who've done. The Mighty Boosh have done it. Vic and Bob have done it. And the reason that people don't cancel these other people is because they like them. They think they're funny. And they think they're cool, and they don't want to be. And also, I think there's also an element which someone told me when Richard Ayoade gave a quote from my book, where someone was watching it play out on Twitter, and they said they could see some people deciding not to go for him because he was just too popular, and they knew it would rebound, so they didn't go for it. So it's a completely arbitrary system used to destroy people who they just don't happen to like.
Welcome to the New Flesh Podcast, the podcast you deserve. My name is Ricky Olpike, and joining me once again is a sitcom enthusiast like no other, Mr. Jonathan Astro. John, how are you?
I'm good, and that's a lovely intro. I'll take it. I'll take all of that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I love sitcoms. Love all that.
Well, we have sitcom royalty on the show today. We've got Graham Linehan, and we dip our toe a little bit into the trans thing, but you know we talk a lot about comedy and sitcoms, which we do. Love.
And you know what? Like, this is another one of those times that I can't believe Graham Linehan's talking to us. Like, I mean, when it started, I almost wanted to say, just stop. Stop it. Stop talking to me. And I walk away, you know, like, because it's just too much. I can't deal with it. Like, this guy is like his shows have made me so happy over the years, you know, like, even stuff that people might not know. So we get into some of this, but yeah, Father Ted, obviously, and the first season of Black Books, which he had a hand in. He was the setup director on Little Britain, so the first episode of Little Britain, which we didn't even talk about. He did Ted and Ralph, which we'll get into. Like his mitts are over a lot of stuff, and you know, I think that. People just forget that.
The IT crowd?
Well, I didn't even mention the fucking IT crowd. Like that's there you go. That's I'm embarrassed. You've embarrassed me on air. But that's amazing. So and you know what? Like he's putting up a real fight with all the trans stuff, and yeah, we don't talk about it much. You know what? Well, we've paid the piper, haven't we? A little bit. I mean, like, we're down for it. But come on.
Yeah. Well, I think he was secretly delighted.
He loved it.
You know, because I mean, that's what he's all about. He's about sitcoms. He's about writing jokes. You know, he's the gag guy. Like, you know, I mean, that's who he really.
Yeah, he was a co-conspirator in the end. He was like, yeah, this is great.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Come for the trans, stay for the comedy. I don't know how to say it.
Yes.
Anyway, you'll love it.
That's almost right, I think.
Okay. We'll leave it at that.
Well, we need your help here at The New Flesh. We need you to leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to the show. We're also on YouTube, so please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment about a show you liked. Word of mouth is also a very powerful tool, so please tell all of your friends that Graham Linehan was on our show. And finally, to our Uber fans, if you love what we do, you can send us a little cash via the Buy Me a Coffee platform. Any donation here is very much appreciated. And now, let's get down to it.
Graham Linehan is a bona fide comedy legend and an activist for the rights of women and girls. He's the creator of Father Ted, Black Books, and the IT Crowd. I must also mention his role in creating the most moving love story between a foppish aristocrat and his low-born groundskeeper in the sketch comedy series The Fast Show. Graham has won more BAFTAs than You've Had Hot Dinners. He's written a fantastic book called Tough Crowd, which is a memoir of his time in British comedy that is loaded with practical advice for the aspiring creative. It also charts his battles against trans ideology and the devastating impact that speaking out has had on his health, family, and career. And we're going to talk about all of it. Graham, welcome to The New Flesh.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Well, I'm going to ask a question that I know no other interviewer has asked you, which is a sad indictment of where we are at. But you begin your book with a quote from Billy Wilder. If you're going to tell people the truth, be funny or they'll kill you. So I'm going to ask you about Billy Wilder. What do you think about Billy Wilder? Do you enjoy Billy Wilder films?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he learned at the knee of Ernst Lubitsch, and Lubitsch was where he got the Lubitsch touch, which is a kind of, as far as I can see, a kind of 3-stage way of telling a story that usually involves some kind of visual element that changes, or I don't know, it might be a phrase that's constantly repeated, but it changes its meaning the last time. And Wilder then went on to apply that in all his films, and all his films have these wonderful moments. I think that's when you know a great film is that when you're following a story and there's a cut to a thing, like for instance in The Apartment, there's a shattered mirror. I think
I knew you were going to bring up the mirror.
And as soon as you see it, you know, you can imagine. Obviously, I didn't see it in the cinema. I saw it on DVD, but you can imagine the audience's gasp at that moment, as without a word, the story is told. So, yeah, he's one of my. And I have to say, like, if people want to learn how to write and people want to kind of study it, his book that he did with Cameron Crowe. Is absolutely essential. It's such a.
I was going to hold it up. It's behind me, but
is it? Oh, good.
Well, I think the Apartment. It's a slightly loaded question. I think The Apartment. I'm going to say it, dear listener. I think it's the greatest movie ever made, hands down.
Yeah, I tried to show it to my kids and they couldn't take the pace. They couldn't take the pace. So yeah, but don't worry, I'm going to bring them back to it. And I think there's some drugs I could give them that will just slow them down enough to watch it. So they. And also, I think they get kind of confused sometimes when they see an old movie that has all these adult themes. Like The Apartment is very much about sexual discrimination at work, about hassling women, you know, and the way that these men think of women, you know. So it's kind of strange for them. They've been so primed to think there's going to be something racist or sexist that they don't know that it's actually anti-sexist.
That's right.
You know
what
I mean?
You've got to spend half your time saying, well, they go, oh, but that's a bit sexist. You say, yes, correct, very good. Billy Wilder's done very good, yes?
Yeah. I know, it's so hard to explain. But again, you know, it's interesting because it is one of the features. I know we'll probably get into all this, but feels like one of the features of the woke movement is they think that art should show the world as it should be rather than as it is, you know. And unfortunately, that's kind of like, you know, that's Russian pre-wall coming down propaganda, you know, showing the world as it ought to be, as the communist regime wished it was, you know what I mean? So that's what we have now here is a kind of although there's things that buck against it, you know. I know a lot of like things like The Boys, I think, are pretty edgy in terms of how they approach all those questions. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I could ramble on.
No,
forever,
that's good. We do have some specific questions about that a bit later. But while we're on influences, I just, you know, expand it from Billy Wilder out. I'm interested to know what your greatest creative influences are, what you count as being, you know, the things that make up your creative outlook.
Well, I was a film critic first of all, so I kind of I came into television through films, and you know, as I say in the book, I kind of grew up wanting to be Scorsese and people like that. Really, not really knowing much more about directing, other than that it involved a lot of pointing while wearing a baseball hat, and that looked like something I could do. And then, like, I started to lower my ambitions because, you know, I was in the UK and Ireland. Film wasn't really as much of a concern. There wasn't really in England a film industry in the way that there used to be with Ealing Films and stuff like that. So it was really television that I could set my sights on. But what I could do was apply some of the principles that I picked up while watching movies and kind of just thinking about films to everything else, including things like, you know, the Lubitsch touch and elements like that, and trying to find also, as time went on, also just trying to find greater emotional moments in sitcoms, which I think you got to be careful of. If you do it too much, it's cheesy. But if you get it just right, it can be powerful. You know, I don't know if you remember watching, you know, like sometimes it went off the rails, but there were episodes of Roseanne where, God, you could hear the audience just gasping, you know, the studio audience. And yeah, it seemed to me a kind of noble ambition to try and find a kind of semi-despised form like sitcoms and try and make them, I don't know, try and do whatever John Cleese did to make Fawlty Towers so extraordinary, and whatever Larry David did and Seinfeld to to make Seinfeld so extraordinary. To try and it seemed like once you get something down to half an hour, suddenly it feels possible to actually do something special. Whereas over an hour and a half, gosh, you have to. I think a lot of directors, I think they have to really fall in love with a subject and a particular area, and then they spend like a good portion of their life digging into that one thing and trying to make this 1 hour and a half, 2 hour story sustain. And as you know, like, it's just the way of the world. 95% of the time, it doesn't work. So this smaller stage was less ambitious, but it kind of paid off better for me. Especially since my imagination leans towards ideas that flare and disappear quite quickly. Ideas that you wouldn't really be able to sustain a film with.
But you could have just been like Fellini and fallen in love with bosomy women and just made bosomy women films in different, eras.
I know, and sometimes you look at directors and you hear about the antics they get up to, like some of the stuff that arose during Me Too and so on, and you think, holy shit, I was putting far too much effort into everything. I could have, it's like, how did they find time to make the film?
Yes, I've always thought that. Yeah, I've always thought that.
Yeah, it's like there's a slight, it seems to be that once you get to a certain power in Hollywood, that the infrastructure around you is like, I'm not saying this as a criticism. I had a wonderful time and I worked with some great people, but I did a pilot, a couple of episodes of a show called Shrink in America with Tim Baltz, who's a very, very funny actor. And it was like a holiday. We had so much time to film everything. We would have a scene involving two people sitting across each other from each other over a desk. We would have 4 hours to shoot it. And, I would be sitting there, and that was the moment where I thought, oh, maybe this is the time they found to harass loads of women.
To get the button installed on the desk,
yes.
The one that locks the door.
Yeah. This is why there's all these kind of, traumas about the size of their... Because, I would have my own office or my own place to hang out on a set. It was tiny. You don't want to spend time there. And you can't really, because you're working all the time. So the acres of money and time that you get in America, I think idle hands made what's that phrase? Idle hands
devil's
were the devil's
plaything.
work in that case. Yeah. So in England, it was just get this shot. We need to get this next shot. If we don't get this shot, we'll have to push it on tomorrow, which will push on other stuff. And so, you spend your entire day in a state of high anxiety and tension as you're trying to get every single shot. There was a terrible moment, actually, that I still think about. It keeps me awake almost. But there's a classic moment that everybody remembers from everybody's favorite episode of the IT Crowd, which is Roy has to pretend that he's disabled to get out of a very embarrassing situation. And at the same time, Moss ends up working. They've all just gone to see a play, and Moss ends up working behind the bar.
Oh my God! Legendary episode. That is one of the greatest sitcom episodes ever.
Yeah. And the joke comes when Jen comes, and she sees Roy in the wheelchair, and she kind of goes, "What the hell is he doing there?" And he's going, "Don't say anything, don't say anything." And then she turns around to get a drink, and Moss is behind the bar in full barkeep uniform, and he's going, don't say anything. And when we were filming it really worked as a bit, and I just thought, oh, this is one of the funniest things, and I was so happy, but I was rushing about, and Chris O'Dowd said, me and Moss should see each other. And I didn't understand what he was saying because I was under so much pressure, but he was absolutely right, because those two characters didn't know what had happened to the other one either. So there could have been a third look from Moss to Roy, and it would have killed. I'd almost use CGI to reshoot that and get that in.
Get your George Lucas hat on and just,
Exactly, yeah. Put a dinosaur in there as well for good measure.
Well, maybe before we focus on your sitcoms, maybe you could give us your top 5 UK and top 5 US sitcoms of all time, if that's even possible.
Well, I'll start by saying, for me, for a very long period of time, for me, the pinnacle were the 3 S's: Seinfeld, Simpsons, and Sanders. Those 3 sitcoms were, for me, they were all around the same time, really hitting their stride. The Simpsons was doing the that brilliant mafia clown school episode, and Seinfeld was still in those first 6 seasons where it was just immaculate. And Sanders was just reinventing how you could shoot one of these things, so that was for a while. They were my lodestars, but beyond all that, I think Fawlty Tower is number one best British sitcom ever made. I don't think there's any competition. 10 episodes, 10 out of 12, I think, are some of the greatest farces ever written. And it's interesting because farces, I think, perhaps don't sustain as a stage experience. So I think what Cleese discovered was that the sitcom format was perfect for these kind of fado farces, where misunderstanding kind of reigns, but because it's half an hour, it doesn't try your credulity. You believe it's, oh yeah, someone could think that this is the case for 10 minutes or whatever it happens to be. And he just played. It was like a perfect meeting of form and writer, and just the greatest. After that, in terms of British sitcoms, I don't know. I mean, Blackadder I thought was great when it was really good. I love I love Dad's Army. Although Dad's Army, when you watch it back, can sometimes be a bit slow. I don't know. There are a few. I'd probably need to space it out during the conversation to give you an accurate.
When you think of them, just blurt them out.
Exactly. But I'll tell you, I mean, there were things that we used to write certain things, like we watched Hi-de-Hi, which is a very kind of, I don't know, it's seen as a cheesy sitcom, but the first season is amazing. It's really good. There was an actor in it who died. I can't remember his name, but he was really genuinely funny. And it was actually the premise of the whole show. So when he died, the show became something else. It still kind of worked, but it wasn't as wonderful as the first series. But the premise of the show was just someone running a holiday camp that is like, where people are just ordinary people trying to have a little break. And he's just too serious for it. He can't really join in because he's very proper, very English. It was wonderful. And we used to watch that when we were writing Count Arthur Strong, which was my last series that not very many people saw, because we just loved the emotional heart at the center of it. It was really moving sometimes, We also watched Bilko for Count Arthur because the character was a schemer and we wanted him to be involved in loads of schemes. And we kind of saw the cafe where he worked, where he hung out, as being like the barracks in Bilko.
Does Sergeant Bilko stand up? Does Sergeant Bilko stand up?
It so stands up. It's one of the few things. I mean, genuinely, there's some episodes of Sergeant Bilko where you are dying. There's one episode, I'll give you an example, right? There's an episode where they think they are entering into a singing competition for different soldiers, different camps. So they go into the wrong place, and it's not a singing competition. What they're doing is they're releasing a potentially deadly bug, like a fly, into the room with the soldiers, and they may die. And they know that, and the scientists all know that they may die, and they're like, "These boys, I can't believe they're doing this. It's the bravest thing ever," So they get them all in, and then they release the bug in, and then they all start singing, "We're heading to the last roundup," and all the scientists are crying, thinking, "Oh, these brave boys," Then it lands on I think it lands on Bilko's arm, and he just goes, it just kills it. So it's like, yeah, it stands up. But, in the room were Sam Simon, who's Neil Simon's brother. Sorry, no, Danny Simon, I think it was. Oh, was it Sam Simon? Danny Simon. Mel Brooks was on the team, I think. I think Woody Allen was briefly on the team. So it's
I suppose it's a pretty good setup. Then.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine being in that room, And also, it was like, I think probably the moment when Jewish humor really took over in America, and Yeah, I love it. I would watch Bilko if, as the Seinfeld line goes, if my hair was on fire, you know.
Well, we've spoken to a few people on this show about comedy and sitcoms, and we've spoken to UK writer Ed West, who penned a great article about the 40th anniversary of Blackadder. We've also spoken to a US sitcom scholar called Saul Austerlitz, and they're both great episodes. Everybody should check those out. It was interesting talking to a Brit and an American about sitcoms because both have very different styles. What do you think sets UK comedies apart from those created in the US?
Well, I noticed that, you know, when you look at our best ones, there's much more of a sense of anarchy and surrealism in UK sitcoms up until recently. A strange thing happened, and I noticed as well that, like, American sitcoms were often very theatrical, and they had a kind of a classiness to them, kind of Woody Allen autumnal feel. Like Frasier's a very good example. Cheers, Cheers was so. One of the stories I love about Cheers is that they so loved the set that they actually gave the set designer royalties simply as a thank you, you know.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was like you look at the set of Cheers and it's so deep and detailed, and there's so many bits to it. It's like all the money went into the set, you know. And you see it again with Frasier. Beautiful set, beautifully, or almost like the curtain is opened on an old Noel Coward player or something, you know. Whereas British sitcoms were always much boxier, grimier, dirtier, more low down. Sets would wobble. Wasn't much perspective to them. But the great thing about them was that they were playgrounds for an incredibly disrespectful, anarchic approach to sitcoms. So, you know, I mean, for me, I remember the first ads for the young ones over here, and it was Vivian, Aid Edmondson and Rick Mail standing beside each other, and they're literally just saying, you know, I think Rick says the young ones are starting on Tuesday night or something, and Vic picks up a frying pan and hits him in the face with it, and he just goes down at a shot like a sack of potatoes. And I felt like a different part of my brain had just, you know, popped into existence. I was like, you can do this type of thing. And it was so exciting that, for me, the history of sitcoms, as far as I'm concerned, is following this kind of anarchic line through, you know, from Young Ones to Blackadder.
We can see it in Father Ted. One of my favorite shots in the entire series is Tom sitting on the fence holding his shotgun, and he's holding it in the most bizarre and wonderful way, and he shoots a bird and it explodes and does that horrible like whiteout where it whites out the whole, like sort of shorts out the lighting setup in the camera. It's just it's just wonderful. I think that's that anarchy which I think you're talking about.
Yeah, we always loved it. But like I noticed also when we did our first series that didn't really work, it was a show called Paris with Alexi Sale. We noticed that you know, pratfalls, anarchy, all these things, breaking the fourth wall. These things are fine, but there has to be a feeling of control and structure somewhere. In the Young Ones, it was simply, you know, a story, you know, like a good story. And funnily enough, when you look at Young Ones, the stuff that doesn't work are all the really crazy non sequiturs and stuff. They, you know, where the camera will suddenly go into a story about two blokes on a desert island who are somehow in the cupboard. All this stuff made it interesting, but it did not sustain it. You don't look back at those parts fondly. The stuff you look back at is the very real character work and the very real observations. They're the bits that survive. So I kind of realized quickly that you can explode things, but people need a rest every now and again. They can't have just craziness flashing in their eyes all the time, or then you get an experience like, you know, you may like it. I apologize if you do, but I always hated it. It's a mad world.
Oh, it's a Stanley Kramer film, is it? Who did this?
Yeah, it's just
This
exhausting.
rat race
It's exhausting.
style, like, I hate all that. They suck.
Exactly.
They're no good.
Yeah. Exactly. And you know, I think what it was at the time was the producers in Hollywood had the power, so their answer to everything was throw money at it, get stars in it, and it didn't sustain as a result. So yeah, so I think that that's always been like Blackadder. It's quite crazy. It has some crazy ideas, but it always was very grounded, very very grounded, and you know that's what kept you watching.
Well, I don't want to say comedy's dead because it never really is, but it does feel like comedy is paralyzed, particularly anything being made by established broadcasters and production houses. In my opinion, see what you think. But the evidence, I think, is pretty clear. You know, where is the Father Ted, The Office, The Mighty Boost, The Arrested Development? I know they're all very different shows, but of our current era. I mean, what's your assessment of the TV comedy landscape currently?
Well, it's not great. It's you know, I think it's interesting. Certain things are still happening. Like for instance, you know, what is it, like 25 years later, and South Park shows absolutely no sign of paying a slightest bit of notice to any of these new taboos that we're all supposed to be observing. Whereas everyone else who doesn't have the same kind of power that Parker and Stone have, they have to toe the line, and they have to be careful, and they have to watch themselves. There's also a very unfortunate thing that goes hand in hand with cancel culture, which is there's a famous quote that I think Jimmy Carr said, a comedian said to him, which was, "The joke that will destroy my career is already out there," you know? And what that means is that, like, you know, when you pump out material all the time, even if it's just on television, let alone social media, then someone over the course of time, someone's going to be able to find 3 things that will destroy you, you know? The thing is, they just decide not to. So I use my example over here, and I hope I'm not putting them in the firing line, but over here, right, David Williams and Matt Lucas were cancelled for doing blackface, you know? But others weren't. There's many others who've done. The Mighty Boosh have done it. The Vic and Bob have done it. And the reason that people don't cancel these other people is because they like them. They think they're funny, and they think they're cool, and they don't want to be. And also, I think there's also an element which someone told me when Richard Ayoade gave a quote from my book, where someone was watching it play out on Twitter, and they said they could see some people deciding not to go for him because he was just too popular. And they knew it would rebound, so they didn't go for it. So it's a completely arbitrary system used to destroy people who they just don't happen to like. The reason they went for Williams is because Williams suddenly started doing things like, you know, The Voice, that type of show, those kinds
Baking
of judging
shows, The Voice, all the variety stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so he comes out, he's always immaculately dressed. He's someone who takes a great deal of care over their, you know, sartorial choices. And, you know, people just thought he was a bit too full of himself. So it's like, let's do the blackface controversy on him. Boom, he's gone. You know, and you know, they made the huge mistake, Williams and Lucas, of apologizing.
I was going to ask you, what do you think of this? Because when I read the mea culpas, I was like, boys, what are you doing?
Yeah, never. Like, it's like, why do they have to apologize and Vic and Bob don't? You know, and I don't think any of them should apologize. It was a different time, and also there's different ways it's used. You know, whatever you say about you know, Williams and Lucas, I'm sure there's arguments that what they did was offensive. But one thing they didn't do was just slap on blackface and do a hokey Al Jolson. You know, they actually were creating characters, and I think that was their. I think that's what they told themselves. This is okay because we're talking about real people, and we're putting effort into creating a character. But that didn't count because people didn't like them. You know, people don't like them.
I think also part of the fun of a show like that is that they do all the characters. It's like the Mighty Boosh, you know. They don't bring on a person of color just to play this one random character in their show.
Yes.
They do everything, and that's kind of the fun of it, right?
Absolutely. It's a kind of like, again, it's a British tradition of slightly cheap and everyone's doing the same role because there's not enough money to get other people in. But it was like, and also you can tell that the people who are getting angry are not the people who are being represented. The people who are getting angry are the white people who think that they can tell other white people how to behave, and they're the worst people in the world. So yeah, I just find it interesting how random and there's a word that I am going to spend the rest of the day trying to find because I need it so often these days to describe this phenomenon, and I just cannot remember what it is. It's something. It's a word that means I'm going to destroy your career, but not yours.
Arbitrary, or
it's arbitrary. There's another one that, yeah, I'm going to start by going into a thesaurus and putting in arbitrary. But it's like that. It's like it's like a king on a throne,
yes.
or Caligula, some sort of sadistic lunatic.
Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah. Like you come in and you go, oh, I've brought him a cake. And you don't know if he'll kill you.
Yes, kiss or kill.
Or marry.
We talk about this in Australia because the 70s Australian movies have famously got kiss or kill you bad guys. Like in Mad Max, all the bad guys in Mad Max, you don't know what they want to do.
Yes, yeah.
Do they want to?
Yes.
Do they want to kind of have sex with you, or do they want to blow your brains out?
Yeah. And I never thought of that. The first Mad Max is they're a little bit of kind of the gang are kind of queer.
They're always wearing
queer
kinkwear. They're always wearing kinkwear.
Yes,
that was the 80s thing as well. Like, the bad guys always were wearing chain mail and other.
Yeah. But they got that right. Like do you know what I mean? But we didn't need society to collapse to allow these guys to start causing havoc.
Well, I feel like the best and most enduring TV comedy is never really that political. It sort of swings both ways or punches in all directions. It seems that whenever the show or their creators get too wrapped up in politics, the work suffers. It sounds like you agree here.
Oh yeah, like the way I've always thought about it is like satire is a grenade. You throw it into a room and it kills everyone in the room. It's not like a sniper's rifle. It's you should be making fun of everything. There's a fantastic scene. I'm sure everyone remembers it because it's part of the golden era of The Simpsons, where there's two pilots and they're in separate planes, and one fires a rocket and it goes out and turns and blows up the other plane, which blows up both planes. And then you cut to the two guys parachuting down, and one says to the other, "This is what happens when you divert money from the military into schools programs." And the other pilot goes, "It's a good program, give it a chance." And then both parachutes go on fire and they fall to their death. And it's like it makes fun of one point of view, and then it makes fun of the exact opposite point of view, and then it kills both of them. And that's what satire should do. It feels to me, yeah. And also, I'll tell you another useful thing about that. When you're making fun of generalized, political arguments rather than the specific people who hold those arguments, which is what I think you mean when you say it's not political, best satire is not political, then it lasts forever. But when you're focusing on a particular political party, it might not last a couple of years, So even Ted has some lines in it that people would be befuddled by around now because they were so closely linked to their time. Like when Dougal says, "We'll be famous like Nelson Mandela and his mad wife." That meant something. That got a huge laugh at the time because she was still, in the news. But now I have to explain to my kids what that even means, you know.
Well, you got a lot of work with these kids by the sound of it, Billy Wilder and the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm working on it. They're coming along.
But maybe we can tease this out a little bit. You have got a bird's eye perspective on this next question, because you made Father Ted in the 1990s, a very particular time, as all times are, I suppose, and had the opportunity to adapt it to for the stage many years later, which we hope to see at some point in the future. But the question is, did the diversity, equity, and inclusion apparatus in film and TV now, did that rear its head a little bit in terms of the content of the new Father Ted? I figured you'd be able to give us a good read on this, because you've got a show from the 90s that you had to bring into another time, and I'm interested in you know.
Do you mean the musical?
Yeah, the musical, like comparing.
Did it start rearing its head? Yeah, there were some interesting things. One of the things was that we wrote it in like specifically so that it would be able to so that it would be diverse. You know, we had long sections in the Vatican, and we thought, that will be where we can bring in our singers from all over the world. So the racial makeup of the stage will suddenly be diverse, and that will happen naturally. But they wanted to put them on Craggy Island, you know. And so we had, like, I remember, I wanted to apologize to him afterwards, although it was neither of our fault. But like there was this black guy there who did the line, I hear you're a racist now, Father. You know that, or no, it was a reinvention of that line that was used at a certain point, and the whole point of it is a little bit of fan service, you know, because the play was quite empty of that, you would get a big response. And they have a black guy doing it, and it's like, well, hang on a second. Do people remember the original? They know it's not. They know it's not a black guy, and I know that theater is a different thing, and you can bend the rules, and it's kind of like playtime. And to be honest with you, if it was like in production of it somewhere else, I wouldn't really mind. I would think that would be quite fun, but it was just trying too hard. And it was like, well, you know, we wrote this to give it a natural diversity. Why are you trying to force the issue? You know. The only other time we had there was one line in it to do with gender, and we could see some people, you know, freezing up at that. But generally, you know, again,
what would Dougal say about all this stuff? I mean, he would say what everyone's saying. Dougal would say it. Wouldn't he just say it?
Absolutely. In fact, I think we had one character who dressed up in women's clothes in the show who turns up at one point. But the thing about, look, here's the problem with what's going on at the moment. It's so insane that it's very, very hard. Like I think basically, like, we need a background of truth and agreed upon reality to make fun. And this, I think, is another reason why comedy is in bad shape at the moment, because we now have this idea that's become really, unfortunately, popular, which is that reality is subjective and everyone's reality is valid, and that's bollocks. You know, and it's not true. There is an agreed upon reality. We have certain words to denote certain things. And until literally about 5 or 6 years ago, we were all agreed on this. And now it's just broken apart, and anyone who challenges it is targeted. Whereas one of the many reasons why I've been targeting it is because I think it's the end of comedy. You know, if you can't agree on a reality, how the hell can you make jokes about it? You know?
Was it ever suggested to you that you couldn't write a sitcom or a musical about priests because of sort of the bad reputation with the whole pedophile thing?
No, it was that stuff was kind of kicking off in Ireland, and it was beginning to cause a little bit of damage. So in a way, Ted was actually a bit of a respite from all that, because we weren't covering it. We had one joke. I think Ted says something like, someone's saying, well, you know, all the paedophile scandals, and Ted says, now if there's 10 million priests in the world and only 1% of them are paedophiles, that's only 10,000. That's only 10,000 people. Something like some terrible bit of maths that Ted has worked out. But apart from that, we kept away from it because it didn't fit with the tone of the show. It was too serious and too sad. And also, we knew a lot of priests who were actually lovely. Arthur's uncles were priests, and he had great affection for them. And I was never really too bothered by the priests I had in my school. They never did much wrong to me beyond what the education system demanded they do. And we were satirical, but with a small s. And then, when I was talking about the satirical grenade, a good example of that would be the episode where we had a kind of Sinead O'Connor figure coming to visit the island. And, we had as much fun making fun of her as we did of the priests who were greeting her. It had my possibly favorite Ted line, which was, there's a cover, she's on the cover of a magazine, and the strap line is clit power. And she's going like this, clit power. And Ted says, Clint Power, what does that mean? He's like, I used to know a Father Clint Power. Maybe she's having a go at him. No, there was never any. The only advice we were ever given was from the head of comedy at Channel 4, Shane Allen, who basically said, as long as you stay away from fundamental tenets of belief, you should be okay. So we could make fun of everything except, the virgin birth and stuff like that. Although we did sometimes play with that a little bit, and crossed over into that. In fact, once we were auditioning for the episode Tentacles of Doom, which involves, at one point Dougal completely destroys a bishop's faith just by asking him too many questions. And we had a guy come up. He was very angry, and he just told us not to make the show. Well, sorry, we're making the show, and it was really unpleasant confrontation. But apart from that, never had a problem.
Well, I'm delighted that I was able to rewatch the entire Father Ted show in preparation for this interview. It's been a long time since I've seen it, actually, and I can't quite put my finger on why priests are funny. Maybe you can help me out here. Maybe it's because they're largely sort of ordinary, unremarkable, and inexperienced middle-aged men, but they're supposed to be the community's moral compass.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know, people see through it, but they go along with it. What are your thoughts on why priests are funny?
You just hit it. You just hit all of them. It's like, I mean, one of the things though that we like to get it to be a priest, you have to study a lot. You have to really know your onions about religious spiritualism and the Bible and stuff. You have to know what you're talking about. But we kind of, for our own purposes, pretended that wasn't true, and we just kind of portrayed the priesthood as a completely frictionless place where lunatics can end up. So it wasn't true, and it was a bit unfair. But that was just what we created. We kind of realized early on that if you get any kind of world that's slightly mysterious, like the priesthood, then you can make up any nonsense you want about it. Like we like our one that like priests buy extra black socks. That is the blackest material in the world. You can only buy it in these shops, and it's only in socks for some reason. Only priest socks are that black. Like nonsense, just nonsense that we pulled off the top of our head. But who's gonna contradict us? It's the same with like I always think David Lynch did the same thing with the FBI in the Twin Peaks things. I don't know if you saw the Twin Peaks movie.
Walk with Me, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Great, it's a masterpiece. Great film.
It's amazing. I love it. But there's a whole sequence where David Bowie is just disappearing and reappearing in hallways. And it's like, what? This is what the FBI do? They investigate David Bowie appearing in hallways. And because, again, the FBI is a slightly closed world that necessarily has to have a lot of secrets, then they can make up anything they like. So, yeah, that might be a good piece of advice for anyone starting a sitcom. Find a closed world that people don't know much about, but people are aware of. And then you can, you can get away with murder.
Well, moving on to one of your other shows, people forget that at the turn of the century, because of the UK office, there was a hard pivot to mockumentary, sort of Spinal Tap style mockumentary with no live studio audience. And I am fascinated that at the height of this style of comedy, that you would pitch and spectacularly pull off a traditional sitcom like the IT Crowd. What was it like convincing executives and everyone else that you knew what you were doing?
Well, yeah, it was strange. Funnily enough, we pitched Father Ted as a documentary, but and because we were just as besotted as everyone else with what they had achieved with Spinal Tap, which up until that point there were a few mock documentaries made before that point, but Spinal Tap was the first one where it seemed like they literally did not put anything in the documentary that wouldn't be in a documentary. Do you know what I mean? So, and they apparently made those decisions as well when they were shooting. There were certain sexual scenes and stuff like that, and they didn't use them because they thought that wouldn't go in the documentary. They wouldn't let it, and that just created it was a very special thing. Slightly dated now, and some of the techniques they came up with have been improved upon since. But in general, gosh, it really rocked our world when it came out. And we thought that, that would probably be easier to shoot because, you get a rough structure and you improvise scenes and you make sure people are it's not too written. We thought that would be easier. So we thought we would make a series of one-off episodes with a different character every week. And Father Ted was just the first one. And we followed him around as he went back to his seminary and met priests he'd studied with, and they've all gone mad and all sorts of different problems. And we handed it in, and they said, no. They said, no, we don't want a different character every week. We want characters who you can come back to and the audience will gradually fall in love with. And so they said, so just take it away and write it as a sitcom. So we went back thinking, what the hell? We couldn't believe they wanted an Irish sitcom, but they did. And we just wrote it like a classic sitcom. And it turned out so well that I guess I also kind of fell in love with the studio sitcom as a form. It felt to me like what it does is it brings a certain kind of comedy out that I'm very comfortable with. Larger than life, primary colours, set up gag. And, I feel like I'm comfortable writing gags, so it suits me. It suits me very well. We could shoot we did a series, I'm sure you've seen, Big Train as well, where we shot single camera very naturalistically, and that's doable as well. But I don't know. I think there's a kind of a magic in front of a studio audience that you don't. It's like a fairy dust. There's a lovely thing sometimes where you can hear, for instance, a joke is coming and you can hear one or two people in the audience can see it coming and they actually vocalize it. And it's almost like the way an idea forms in your brain is the way the audience is reacting to it, slight tendrils of something, and then it grows and grows. And then it becomes this explosive celebration that the whole audience is in on. I love it. It's my favorite thing in the world.
Do you think the average TV viewer misunderstands the laugh track? Like, perhaps you can outline what benefit it brings to an audience member that's sitting at home on the couch.
Well, the way I see it is, I'll tell you an interesting story to lead into this. The first and the second series of Alan Partridge, the sitcom version. You may remember the first one was set in a travel lodge. Where he was staying while he was, I think, waiting to move after a divorce or something, Very clear concept. 6 episodes that worked very, very well. Then the second series happened. Second series wasn't as clear. He was waiting in some sort of caravan while his house was being built. And he would walk along the motorway, which was a funny joke, to get to a garage where his friend worked. Suddenly it was just like a messy premise, Anyway, first series was shot in a very specific way. They had a 4-walled set so that you could put a cameraman into the set and he could turn around 180 and not see any audience. And it was a bit of a bummer for the audience because the audience came to see Steve Coogan. He would appear at the start, go into this surrounded studio, and we wouldn't see him until the end of the show. But what it did was it gave you a 3-dimensional thing, like a 180-degree set, but audience laughter, right? And the audience, and they could hear from the inside, they could hear the audience responding, and they would respond to it. Anyway, second series comes along. Again, as I say, it's got this slightly muddy premise. And suddenly everyone's complaining about the laughter. And loads of different people said there wasn't any laughter on the first series. And there was. It was just that the first series, the premise worked, the jokes worked, everything came together. So no one noticed the laughter, except that, but they loved the show. And then the second series came along, premise wasn't quite right. You know, the story suffered as a result. And everyone suddenly starts hearing the laughter. It starts bothering them. So what I just find interesting is, like, people notice laughter when they're not enjoying something, but when they're enjoying something, it just disappears. And we never had any complaints about studio laughter until like we'd have it at the very start of a series when someone hadn't yet acclimatized to the character and situation. People would talk about canned laughter. But then, again, after a while, they just stop noticing and they enjoy it for what it is. Now, you might ask, why is it there at all? Why do you need it at all? But for me, I think of it like a musical soundtrack. It's like, especially if you're doing those kind of big, bold, primary color jokes that I used to do. They hit hard, and I think in a single camera naturalistic setting, they would not be as good. They are gags. They're not just like characters revealing themselves accidentally through dialogue. There is that, but but I love gags. I love gags with a setup and a payoff, and it just suited it, and it made the actors. The actors could see this moment. They knew exactly what this moment had to do. And so when you're doing it and you get the laugh, got it, did it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some actors hated it, though, because they didn't know whether they should be playing to the camera or to the audience. And it really screwed them up. They were used to rehearsing a play for months and then putting it on stage. We would rehearse this one-off play that was like half an hour long on TV for 1 week, and the time in front of the camera was the only time you could get it right. So it's. I think another reason why they died is because actors didn't like them. It's a nerve-wracking experience for them.
Well, there's something interesting about this idea of laughing together. Like, you even have these laughing clubs where people meet in parks with strangers and they just start laughing, and the laughing is infectious, and then they just laugh for half an hour.
It sounds like David Brent, though. He tries to get them to do that in the training course or whatever that he's doing, remember?
Yeah, I can't think of anything worse.
But there is something about being with other people and experiencing laughter. Like, if it's just you alone on your couch, it feels like you're with a group of people, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I think also there's comedy seems to attract certain kind of cynical mindset as well, and they reject the idea of being part of a crowd, being part of a shared experience. But they may reject it consciously, but I think subconsciously they love it just as much as everyone else. There's and we're missing it from so many other parts of our lives. I know in Ireland, probably partly because of the effect TED had, mass attendance is non-existent anymore, But there's something to be said for getting together with a bunch of people who live in your local area and reminding yourself that they're human beings and that you can actually physically shake their hands. There's something to be said for those kinds of meetups. And an audience is a good way of doing it without putting any kind of religious covering over it. It's nice to be reminded that you share a sense of humor with people, that you all notice the same things and that you all think the same things are funny, and they just have to be presented in a certain way. to give you that result. I'll tell you what I found very inspiring recently. I don't know if you've seen. Have you seen Michelle Wolf's stand-up specials?
Not her specials, no.
They're on Netflix. They're only about half an hour long. She's done a clever thing where she's just taken a set in different places and done them. She is incredible. And it seems to me that, like, basically she got into trouble about 5 years or 6 years ago for a White House correspondent. Yeah. And I haven't heard much about her since. You know, she's not been in any movies. I haven't seen any stand-up specials. One, I think it was. And then suddenly she appears with this. And it's so great. She kind of teaches the audience how to laugh at certain things that they've been kind of told they're not allowed to laugh at. You know? Like, there's an extraordinary bit in it. It's just a throwaway joke where she uses her own sexual assault for a throwaway joke. She says, she's talking about something else, and she says, I didn't like that. She says, but I didn't like being raped either. And she goes, I'm more of a social cues girl. You know? Absolutely extraordinary. So audacious. And gives the audience permission to laugh at it, and then uses the same principle to go on to talk about things like Me Too, which are surrounded by lots of things you're not allowed to say, not allowed to think. And she punctures them all. And you can hear the relief in the audience. Oh, we're allowed to notice this. We're allowed to laugh at this. It's kind of what I think a comedian should be doing, is saying, you know, these hard, intractable things in our lives that we cannot process anymore. Well, I'm going to process them for you, and I'm going to let you, join other people in seeing the ridiculousness of it, fighting back against it to some extent. You know,
yeah.
That's why I think so many comedians at the moment. God, I wouldn't cross the road to see them. You know,
I'm obsessed with the Fast Show, and I'm embarrassed to say that I never knew something behind this show. And finding out that you were behind Ted and Ralph, if I'm correct. To me, that was like the final shot in The Shining of Jack being in the hotel the whole time. I was just like, it blew my mind. I was like, I had the same reaction too. It's where you nod your head and you go, yes, of course. Of course, Linehan was here. Of course he was. So tell me about this sketch. This is a huge sketch. Like this took on a life of its own. It became its own show, really.
Well, I still kind of. I can't believe I didn't put it in the book. I just totally forgot to put it in the book, and it's such an important principle because we literally wrote that sketch while kind of theorizing about sketches, and then came up with a sketch to suit the theory. And what it was we were on a train and we looked out the window and we saw a big old stately home, and I can't remember which one of us was saying it, but we came up with the theory that all a sketch has to do is find some sort of relationship that people know exists, but they don't necessarily see it a lot. So we saw the stately home. Author remembered a documentary about John Berman, where he has a very awkward conversation with a groundskeeper on his grounds, who talks just like Ralph does or Ted does in the sketch, and then through that we pitched just the idea of someone approaching from miles away, looking very shy and having an awkward conversation, and then saying, "Do you like Tina Turner?" You know, and it turns out he's got tickets to see them, and you realize, oh my God, he's going to ask him to Tina Turner, and that kind of then developed to he loves him, he's in love with him. So yeah, it was just like that. I was particularly proud of that sketch because, as I say, it just came from theorizing about what makes a good sketch to making a good sketch, you know? So we were delighted with that. The other thing that happened it's kind of bizarre that we have two characters called Ted who are very famous and they're both Irish. But the only reason they're Irish is that when we were pitching the idea to Paul Whitehouse and Charlie Higson, I did the voice and they were just copying me. So they just kind of, like, whenever I talk, to me, I sound like a completely, accentless person, but they were just hearing, hello there, and all that sort of stuff, So that's what they made the character Irish, So, it was kind of a nice combination of happenstance and, very seriously trying to figure out what makes a sketch work.
Arguably, it's the emotional heart of that entire show. Like it is. You feel a genuine sense of aching for these two people. You know, like throughout, like you're just like, oh God, I want them to be together. But there's too much in the way of their love. You know.
Yes. Yeah, I think they played with it. They wrote a special that we didn't write, and I think they just broke the internal logic of it a little bit with I don't know. It didn't work for me. Maybe because sometimes a sketch idea like that, it works because of the space around it. You know what I mean? Like you're just seeing a tiny moment in these people's lives, and it makes total sense. And the audience sustains however long it's on screen. But once you get into past that and you start thinking about the reality of it, like Charlie's character would never be into Ted. He's an old grizzled man. There's nothing going for him. So the idea that Charlie is just kind of thinking, "Oh my God," and thinking about him at night and stuff, it doesn't make any kind of sense. So like once it leaves the sketch, the confines of the sketch, I think it slightly falls apart.
Well, seeing as we're getting pretty deep on what makes jokes, you write about something called joke baskets, which you say you discovered whilst working on Father Ted. Can you explain this concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think it might have been from Ted. At least we started using them on Ted, but we may not have named them until later. But it's a very easy way of coming up with material. It's simply that, like, the example I give in the book is, Craggy Island, the geographical features of Craggy Island. This was like a joke basket that we could keep adding to. Like the idea there's no west side because the west floated away. There's no landmarks on the island. Except Ted says, well, there's the field, and they go, oh, there's a field, and he goes, well, it's not really a field, but it has less rocks in it than most places. So suddenly, just the whole area of a geographical joke basket full of things that you can throw in, usually in the form of dialogue, but not always. Like the very dark caves would be an example of something that came from that. And you can just chuck in all these jokes that are to do with this thing. Once you know that that's one of the staked out areas of comedy that you've created, it becomes easier to create because, you get stuck for a bit. You look around at all your various joke baskets, whatever they might be, and you see, oh, geographical. Maybe we can do something about, do another little, put another little image in the audience's mind of how awful where they live is. Now, this could come in useful at various different points. You could start off by coming up with a joke basket and just writing a list of jokes. Use it as a kind of a menu that you return to later. Or you just kind of, as you're writing, you realize, oh, I've got a joke basket here. I've got something that I can return to and use again and again and again in different ways and keep generating material out of. So, yeah, I think part of the secret or trick to writing is tricking yourself. Is like, it's kind of really hard to write a draft of a sitcom that makes sense and has a beginning, middle, and end, and ticks a lot of different boxes that audiences need to stay engaged. So any little thing you can do to shortcut or help the process is really useful. So joke baskets were just one thing that I would put. I would actually I would say that to someone who's coming up with a premise is what kind of joke baskets do you have? Do you have like things you can return to over and over again? If they don't, it means that the world they've created hasn't been thought through enough. Trying to think of an example. There was one. What was I going to say? No, something jumped into my head, but it jumped out again. But
I was just going to say, just while we're on this, do you have a process for coming up with concepts? Because we talked a lot about, idea development and things like that. I mean, three banished rubbish priests on a rubbish island is a concept. Do you know what I mean? How do you know when it works and when it doesn't?
Well, I think the simplest thing, the most important thing is you can say it really easily. Like as you say, the three worst priests in the world have been banished to the worst island in the world. That is like such a clear premise, and its clarity means that you have its clarity and its specificity creates a universe of possibilities. Whereas if you don't have that clarity and specificity, then you don't have much, because like it's too hard to know what goes in and what doesn't go in to this idea that you have. So what I'm looking for when I begin looking for an idea is a premise that I can explain in around 10 words,
We've got an issue.
and sometimes
We've got an issue recently of this because the new Frasier's come out and we've been watching it, and it's the reboot, and they got a premise problem. Really, the first two episodes, the setup. I mean, I got to say that the show is, in my opinion, I'd love to hear what you think if you managed to see any of it. But I think it really comes into its own from 3 onwards. But the first two, clunky. Like I wouldn't be able to explain the setup to someone new, really.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it sounds to me that what they did is they thought they had to reinvent the wheel. Like sometimes the first episodes of sitcoms are like that. They're called. There's a thing you can write called a premise pilot.
Yes.
And a premise pilot is what we had with the IT Crowd, where all the characters didn't know each other, or some did, but generally the trio didn't know each other. And the first episode is about them meeting each other for the first time. That's a premise pilot. I think that a much better type of pilot is like the one we had in Father Ted, where really it could have been any episode. We could have put any episode at the start, because like the characters in every episode, as we wrote Father Ted, as we went on, kind of reintroduced themselves every week, and it was a living arrangement that had existed previously. So it's almost like, you kind of hop onto an already moving train, and it's a very smooth transition. But premise pilots, which is what it sounds like they've created for some fucking reason on Frasier. How do you need a premise pilot on Frasier? It's so, you know what I mean? It sounds like they just kind of slowed themselves down by thinking they had to explain things that they maybe didn't have to explain. Is Hugh Laurie in it?
No, it's the guy Nicholas Windhurst from.
Nicholas Windhurst, yes. What an interesting piece of casting.
Well, he's Frasier's like old English friend from Harvard, but he's not working class. He's fully upper crust.
Yes.
So they've.
Does it work? Does he work?
Yeah, like I'm a sucker for this show. So I mean, Ricky, maybe you can bring me down to earth, but I think that it's a weird mosaic of the elements that made up Frasier. Like they've taken all of the elements and repurposed them in different characters, which I think is really hard to do and really quite clever. And look, it's not sparkling like the previous show, but I mean they've done probably 300 episodes. So I mean.
I just don't see it. I always just think it's like with the Sex Pistols reforming, when they're in their 50s or 60s even. It's just like, this is why do, and it's just money. I mean, like, to be fair though, I realized that I'm dancing close to the wind here because we did the TED musical, but we genuinely did think that recreating it as a musical and turning it into something new would do what, like, I don't know, but one of my favorite things is Mel Brooks' musical of The Producers. I love the original, but the musical is its own beast and is wildly enjoyable for different reasons, and that's what we were trying to do. But I just don't see the point of going back and doing a sitcom with older versions of all the actors.
I think they should have done Frasier the musical. That would have been great.
That might have worked. Yeah. I'll tell you what, doing the musical on TED, it was great because I used this book called The Secret Life of the American Musical that suggests that American musicals follow a certain pattern, and he lists the songs that would go into this pattern. So I aped that, and I thought, okay, we're going to have the TED song where he reveals who he is here, what really drives him, Mrs. Doyle, same thing. What's behind? What's her motivations for serving these men so selflessly for her whole life? And it was great. It just kind of opened it up and gave us new insights and new ways of new kind of jokes. And yeah, it turned out really well. But I would never, like, for instance, get all the old team back for the IT crowd and show everybody what they look now, because it'd be too sad. Everyone gets older. Everyone gets older. And
that Friends reunion was pretty tough. I mean, Matthew Perry, may he rest in peace. But I tell you what, that reunion was tough to look at.
Yeah. It's like, why not just kind of, I don't know, people are too, I think people think they want things that they don't actually want.
That's so true. Yeah. That is a great quote. But that's so true, though. That people want things that they don't actually want.
Well, that is why the Seinfeld reunion episode on Curb Your Enthusiasm is absolute genius, because he's able to give you just enough of a reunion episode show, but not enough to betray what you loved about it. I think he did it so well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, even like, he does it out of somewhat out of desperation, doesn't he? And I remember Jerry is talking to him at one point, and he was going, "You always hated these things. Why are we doing it?"
Because he's trying to win Cheryl back. That's why he wants to cast Cheryl in the latest episode.
Yeah. So it's like, it gives it it's not just the old stuff reheated in the microwave. It's like a new dish. That's worth doing. And I think that, like, the new dish has to take into account, like, for instance, you may not, the actual appearance of the Sex Pistols may not have really been one of the greatest moments in rock history, but I bet you a documentary about it would have been great. Because then you would have seen the effect of time on all these people, and do you know what I mean? And the way their lives are different from who they were in the 70s when they were, like, just over teenagers. I think Sid was a teenager.
You say it's a good documentary. What was it from years ago? Filth and the Fury by Julian Temple, which is
that's a brilliant documentary.
Great stuff. Yeah, which kind of captures some of that.
Yes, it does a little bit. Yeah, and it does an interesting thing as well. It doesn't show their faces. Yes. They're all in silhouette.
Yes.
So it's a smart documentary. Yeah, I love that.
Well, seeing as we're on the topic of music, you dabbled in music journalism early on in your career, and there's a passage in your book that sums up the feeling that I've had about music for the past decade or more, which I'd like to read out and get your thoughts on. The music press is all but dead now. The internet dropped a big old nuke on music as transformative youth culture. Jarvis Cocker of Pulp put it best when he said that music suddenly had the same utility as a scented candle. The tribal element of pop has also largely gone, which is a great shame because historically it's one of the human race's more successful experiments with tribalism. Fans of The Cure weren't sacking Rome or sending violent abuse to beloved children's authors. Now, when I read that line, music suddenly had the same utility as a scented candle, it stabbed me directly in the heart. It summed up all the sadness I felt about the fall of the music industry. And I see it today with kids out there. They're just not impressed by music anymore. It's just something that's suggested to them by an algorithm on a streaming site. It's absolutely everywhere. It's on your phone. It's in the car. It's, everywhere you go throughout the city, there's music. They don't pore over liner notes or wait outside of record stores when a new album hits the shelves. Do you think the rise of sort of unhealthy online tribalism has arisen maybe because of the death of music?
I think it's a factor, definitely. I mean, like, there's the trans movement is a youth culture, as a kind of zombie youth culture, in the sense that there's no music associated with it. There's no art. There's no good movies associated with it. It has produced nothing, and it's I don't know. I guess it's because instead of and it was always silly that I sometimes look at it and think, gosh, I used to be so. Joey Santiago of the Pixies once bought me a beer, and I would have kept the bottle. You know what I mean? If I thought, because like I just thought he was the coolest man who ever lived. But he's just a guy. He's just a guy who can play guitar. You know, but we worship these people, and there is something silly about it, and it's in some ways you could say it's good that it's gone, because it also led to a lot of things like, you know, groupies and misusing of power, misusing of position, and all that sort of stuff. However, I do miss the kind of innocent fluttering of the heart when you hear a favorite person, band, whatever it happens to be, mentioned. Fandom was a healthy thing, but I don't know. It seems to be like fandom has become a sort of toxic culture. You know, now we associate fandom with things like Harry Potter fandom and you know, Doctor Who fandom. These are toxic, incredibly toxic arenas. You know, they're not. They're policed extremely strictly. You know, you can get cancelled from any of these kinds of groups. Whereas, I don't know, in the old days, it seemed like music was a good place for the misfits and the outcasts to find a safe home. Whereas now, the misfits and the outcasts are gravitating towards unreadable American academics and perverted European sexologists.
Yes.
These are not good heroes to have, you know,
Right.
And they're not even heroes, these people. Like, a lot of the people who are going along with the trans movement probably don't even know who Judith Butler is, you know? But they're still following the nonsense that she's laid down and others like her have laid down. So, yeah, I just think that it's a busted flush, really. And I think in the absence of a healthy, welcoming culture for the rejected, the people who sit at the back of the class and write short stories, or, you know, the people who wear black eyeliner and stuff like this, they've got nowhere really to go except the trans movement, you know.
Yeah, I feel as though my son's generation, and my son's 5, that his generation would not have a music that they can call their own, that they can claim ownership of, you know. And I hope I'm wrong about this, but, you know, do you have any thoughts on how this soundtrackless generation is going to be affected?
Well, they're not so much soundtrackless. I mean, the people fall in love with things like TikTok songs they hear on TikTok and stuff like that, and there's still music that kind of bleeds through to people. And while, yeah, it's a bit of a shame that algorithms are doing all our kind of what we used to do in physical locations, searching through record racks, but the algorithms are still delivering music. You know, they're still delivering. And I have to say, if you do the work and you do dig down into music, it seems to me that it's one of the few things that hasn't suffered artistically. I just think that there's always good music being produced. It's like each generation comes up, finds something they like, does a spin on it, and it's always great. Or, you know, not always great, but like the great ones are always great. And so I still love music, and you know, I still keep hearing stuff that just knocks me out of my shoes, you know. Films are different, though. I worry about films much more. I feel like someone put it best when they said the church of cinema is dead, and I think that's truer and sadder in a way. Again, disappearing audiences, you know. But it's just kind of heartbreaking that, like, and I think it's also mirrored by the fact that, you know, Scorsese is making these somewhat bloated movies. You know, I did like The Irishman, but
Leo.
Like,
he picked Leo.
I know, of all the people.
He works with Daniel Day-Lewis once and goes, anyway, I saw this movie last night. It's called Jacob's Room, and I'm going to pick. And you go, and Daniel's like, what about me? You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Daniel, I find sometimes a little bit cold as an actor. But Leo, I don't see what they see in him. I think it's. Yeah, I don't get
New
it.
Scorsese fans, I can't stand it. When someone's like, oh, yeah, I love Shutter Island and The Departed, I go, stop talking. Stop talking. This is enough.
Was Leo good when he was young, though? Like when he was 15? Is that the Leo that's good?
Romeo and Juliet, yeah? Sure.
Yeah.
And also that film he was in with what's his name from
Gilbert Grape or something.
Gilbert Grape. Yeah, where he played a mentally handicapped guy, and it was very, very good. He was brilliant in it. The problem with him is that for me, he's always been that kid. I could never take him seriously as a grown-up.
But what about all the silly wigs and the mustaches? And you're not convinced by this stuff, or?
Yeah, no, not really. And also when he was in like like a lot of Tarantino films, I really enjoyed Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yes.
But then you see it a few times again. It's like, well, what is this whole scene in the Western town doing? What's it doing in the movie? What does it have to do with anything? And so, like, sometimes I feel sorry for someone like him, because I think the real problem is, they're not being given the right stories. They're not being cast in the right parts. And there's probably a great part for Leo out there somewhere. But
I thought about this because you mentioned it in your book. You talk about the timelessness of 70s movies and how other eras, particularly in the 80s and whatever, seem to wear themselves on their sleeve, so to speak. And I was watching a film last night, rewatching a film, Jack Nicholson in The Passenger. And I tell you what, I couldn't. We can't watch a whole film now in one sitting, but I got through an hour and 20 before bed, and it just romped along. This is a serious film. Jack is just a legendary figure. It was like him working with Mike Antonioni, and it was just a worthy piece of cinema, And
is this the recent Passenger
from
2020?
No, 1973.
Oh. Okay. So who was that again? Who directed it?
Michael Antonioni did it, and and Jack Nicholson's in it. But it was just one of these things. Like,
yes.
Those guys back then, they do their American films, but it would still be like imagine that you do like 5 Easy Pieces, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. You go, I'm just off to Italy to work with Antonioni.
Yeah.
Doing some serious movie, and I think about the mystery in the world they lived in, like no internet, like they've just got papers and newspapers, and you're not getting all that information. They go and make this weird little expensive art movie, and they put it out. I mean, this is dazzling. 1970.
Yeah. I thought that I was such a fucking evangelist for the internet, and I thought, oh my god, we're gonna have a new golden age of cinema, because now you can make a film on an iPhone. And instead, what we got was a kind of a glut of not very good things, And not only that, but like you would think that the more established people like Tarantino and Scorsese would take extra special care in, for instance, not making their films 3 hours long, so that you don't, do you know what I mean? But they don't. They indulge themselves. They shoot the shit out of everything, and they keep everything on screen. And it's like, I don't know, it's just a shame, because the key is always the script. If you can just make the script, if it can make sense, if it's clear, it's meaningful, it has an incredible conflict where you really don't know which way it's going to go for the whole film. Oh my god, you know that feeling when you see a movie like that and you're like, oh my god, this is good. That's what like Game of Thrones was like at its best.
Oh yes.
You did not know whether the ground would fall from beneath
First
you.
6 seasons made me feel like a kid again. Made me feel like awe-inspired, like it was bigger than me. I was like,
yeah. And suddenly every single character who comes on screen, you are genuinely worried whether they're going to make it to the end of the scene. That's an extraordinary thing to be. You don't feel like that with a lot of movies and a lot of TV shows, because everyone feels too protected. And sometimes they might do the Janet Leigh thing of killing off a big character or something like that. Became a hilarious cliche for a while. My favorite example was Deep Blue Sea. When Samuel Jackson was on land and he was killed by a shark, those devices have run their course, and what really needs to come back in their place is proper storytelling. But like, I remember, God, I saw Tarantino going on about Hateful Eight, and he was so proud of himself that he'd rewritten it. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, you always rewrite it. You always. You should never stop rewriting your film. There's always work you can do on it. But like, he seemed to be just proud that he'd rewritten it once or twice. And, you still look at it and it's still not a very satisfying film. It's still a bit annoying. There's another thing also that I noticed, which is a kind of, it's interesting. I saw this with two films, I think, recently. And what it is they don't have the morality right, if that makes sense. They'll like have a character kill someone, and then at the end of the film, like, let's say, the film I'm thinking of is The Killer. I don't know if you've seen this new film with David Fincher and Michael Fassbender, but it's got like what I would call graphic novel morality. Like in the old days in a film, if someone killed an innocent character, they suffer because of it, or they certainly don't have a happy ending, because they know that a great percentage of the audience will be going, "What about that woman he killed?" Do you know what I mean? And they won't feel the satisfaction that they think that's what The Killer is like. The Killer, he kills an innocent guy in a taxi cab at one point. And I just thought, well, where's his punishment for that? Why didn't he get and it's because it's like a graphic novel morality where everybody's very cynical and cool. And, the artist had a good way of drawing the brain spattering on the windshield. You know what I mean? Which worked in the graphic novel. But over the course of a film, which you see in continuous time, there's different pleasures to be had from that, and also different rules that you need to apply so that you can maintain this empathy throughout the film. So I see a bunch of things like that now where I end the film thinking, why was I supposed to like that person? Or what was I supposed to even think during that film? Who was I up for? What was I wishing would happen? And these questions, they've, a lot of, like, when you don't rewrite and when you just kind of think, I've written some cool dialogue and that's all I need to do, then, it just makes for these slightly sour experiences. Sorry, I'm rambling a bit.
No, this is great. This is great. We're big cinema fans, big sitcom fans. So it's so great to have you on the show and to be able to talk to you about these sorts of things, But I wanted to change gears slightly and talk a little bit about social media. You write about the early days of Twitter and the optimism that you felt for the platform in your book. And you've gone through a lot on Twitter, having been, an early adopter. You later got banned, and more recently in the Musk era, you've been unbanned. So what's your current views on social media? Are you still optimistic that there's something good about it?
Gosh, I don't know. I think there's a problem at the moment, which is a kind of a flattening of our discourse, in the sense that, like, there's certain things you cannot talk about, certain things you cannot say, certain ways you cannot say them in, and so discourse is flattened. And anyone who sticks their head up and starts saying something that's ever so slightly diverges from the norm is can be destroyed. That's a dangerous thing to be. It's like, if you imagine a landscape of people and one person puts up a flag, then you're going to be able to find that person and deal with them, That's what it seems to me our flattened social media landscape is doing to us. It creates targets for everybody else to swarm around and destroy, So, and part of the problem is because a lot of crazy people who we shouldn't be listening to are in very prominent positions, thought leaders, YouTubers, TikTokers. We've seen recently, suddenly everybody thinks that Osama bin Laden is the bee's knees.
He had some ideas.
And it's, yeah. Let's listen to what he has to say. What you realize is that, like, and especially combined with this kind of popular opinion that subjective truth is truth, then you have a very dangerous position where, you're going to get a lot of people coordinating online who shouldn't be coordinating online. Basically, I just think the way I put it is, in the old days when we only had 4 channels in the UK anyway, someone like Jimmy Savile had to become a radio DJ, a big star, do lots of charities. He had to do all that to get to the kids that he wants to get to, you know, and suddenly for a while, for a good long time, most of his career, most of his life, he had access to those kids, you know. It was a rare, specific, unique person that he was in situation and form of monstrosity. But what we have now is an ability for, it's like, not like Jimmy Savile is the only person in the UK who was like that. There were loads of them. They just didn't have the opportunity, you know? And what's kind of worrying now is that the internet has given these types of personalities, predatory, dangerous, boundary-breaking personalities, a chance to coordinate online to come up with the same arguments, the same kind of attack lines, and get away with far much more. I won't mention any names because I'm constantly getting people in trouble by doing this. So I'll let you guys off the hook. But like, you know, in the UK, there was a group called the Paedophile Information Exchange. Now, their big mistake was calling themselves the Paedophile Information Exchange. they kind of, after a while, they got like way more famous, way more powerful than they should have gotten. They had, over here, they had politicians like Harriet Harman supporting them because to a kind of a, to that audience at the time, it seemed like the gay argument had been won. So some people were beginning to go, oh, is it the same with pedophiles? And these pedophiles were arguing, yes, it is. It's exactly the same, you know. And people fell for it for a while, but then they realized, hang on a sec, this is crazy. They're called the Paedophile Information Exchange, and those people were, they weren't heard from again. They all went off and disappeared into various different areas, But now what's happened is the same thing that motivated those men to form the Paedophile Information Exchange is motivating a new group of men. Unfortunately, they are not limited by their geography. They can connect across the world. They all have the same aim, which is to get to children. And they come up with more sophisticated variants of the arguments that the Paedophile Information Exchange were pushing, you know? And they are creating the world that benefits them. There's an extraordinary story Genevieve Gluck of Redux magazine discovered, which was that WPath was linking to a website called the Eunuch Archives. WPath is supposed to be the world leader for trans healthcare, and they were linking to a website that was essentially a repository of short stories about cutting your dick off. Like erotic short stories, inverted commas, about cutting your dick off. 40% of the stories on the website were tagged minor. So 40% of the stories were about cutting young kids' dicks off. And some of those stories had transition as a theme. So it was like tricking kids into thinking they're trans and all this sort of stuff, you know? And one of those forum members was talking about some kind of medical meeting they had with WPath or someone like that. And they literally said, we create the world we want, you know, which reminded me of, I don't know if you remember, but during the Iraq War, Dick Cheney said a similar thing. He said, we create the reality on the ground that we want. So in other words, if the Americans said something, then that was the truth. And what always horrified me about this new movement is that instead of fighting against that kind of arrogant kind of dismissal of the truth and of reality, the left have embraced it. You know what I mean? And are using it to get what they want. Not that the left are all pedophiles, but this particular section of society has glommed itself onto the left because their motives align. You know. It's so crazy. The left now are completely anti-safeguarding, completely anti-women's rights. They are trying to invent categories like queer children or trans children. This plays into the hands of all these connected Jimmy Saviles, you know. So that's my answer. I don't think it's going well, the internet.
No, it's Twitter's no good. But now I try and take every single character that The Guardian prints with a grain of salt, but I find their review of your book, Tough Crowd. Very curious. Allow me to read this excerpt. Quote, when Graham Linehan was starting out as a comedy writer in London, he would go to see stand-up, where I should do my Guardian voice. You know, the smarmy one. When Graham Linehan was starting out as a comedy writer in London, he would go to see stand-up where he would upbraid audience members who were, quote, talking or otherwise being rude, close quote. Once, while watching Noel Fielding and Julian Barrett's The Mighty Boosh in a pub theatre, a drunk man began shouting, so Linehan told him to, quote, shut the fuck up, close quote. Later, the man followed him into the toilets where he smashed down the cubicle door. The quote, thankfully, Linehan recalls, he'd expended all his energy on kicking the door in, so I was able to see him off with the force of my terrified stare. This last line's the kicker, Graham. Quote, wading into other people's fights has proved a theme for the co-writer of Father Ted and the writer-director of the IT Crowd. That's the smoking gun. That's their smoking gun. So your anecdote in the pub, they were like, see?
Yeah. Yeah. Why would, yeah. It's interesting. It's like wading into other people's fights, like as if the well-being of women and children is not everyone's fight. You know, it's a typical move pulled by these people. You know, the idea that I'm intruding or talking about something that has nothing to do with me. So, well, no, I was born from a woman. I have a daughter, I have a sister. Do you know what I mean? These are important people to me. You know, so.
What just popped into my head is that you see quite often footage from like New York subways where some woman is being menaced by some guy, and there'll be a trainload of guys just sitting around, like not doing anything, staring at their phone, like looking at the ground, like no one wants to get involved. You know, there was a time where all of those guys would have stood up and, you know, either made that guy stop like immediately, or they would have fucked him up. Like, or you know, they would have restrained him. They would have punched his face in. Like, you know, I mean, what's happened to the world where you know people feel as though they can't get involved. You know.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's that famous poster that was up at Bristol University that said, and this was in a women's toilet. So these are young women who are setting out for the first time, often away from their families. And the poster said, if you see someone in here who looks like they don't belong, don't stare at them, don't say anything. They just feel comfortable in the space. All this stuff saying basically don't make a fuss if a man is in the toilets with you. And it's like, this is the worst advice you can give to someone. And also it disempowers, it takes away a thing that the only thing sometimes that women have in their favor, because women are on average weaker than men, and men can overpower them with ease in a lot of cases. And so the one piece of power that women have is the ability to make a fuss, you know, which fucking terrifies men. They do not like it when they're trying something on and suddenly there's a lot of people paying attention. So this has been the most extraordinary attempt to weaken safeguarding across society for the very people who need it, you know? Like you know, I always think of the same scenario, which I think is a believable scenario, because something like this happened to me once. I was once followed around by this guy for ages. It took me ages to shake him. But I think he was just a gay guy who thought I was gay and you know, whatever, which was fine. You know, it wasn't too much.
I've seen Cruising. I know how it goes down.
Yeah. Maybe I was dressed wrong with the hot pants, but like, but if you're, let's say you're a 16-year-old girl and you are walking around a shopping center, feeling a little bit of, you know, independence and excitement at being a person in your own right, and someone starts following you, some bloke starts following you. It used to be that a woman could go into the toilets and have a bit of a safe haven, maybe meet some other women in there who could say, don't worry, we'll make sure he's gone when you go out, all that sort of stuff. But now they're saying that these places are no longer the one place where this young girl can go to be safe. And no one seems to care about them. That's what I find extraordinary about this fight. From the moment I got into it, there's no empathy for these girls, no empathy for these parents who are watching their kids disappear in front of their eyes because they're taking cross-sex hormones. There was no empathy for me when I was going through what I was going through. No one seemed to give a damn. So there's a pretty terrifying lack of compassion abroad. That means that people don't do the most basic things to put themselves in other people's shoes, you know. And as soon as you do that, you realize, oh, hang on a sec. No, of course, women should be allowed to make a fuss. As soon as you do it, as soon as you have any form of emotional intelligence, you know, then I just don't know whether people are switching it off or whether it's degraded in people. I don't. I find it's one of the big questions of my last few years is where is everybody?
Well, they're
You know,
they're taking Homer's line from The Simpsons where he says, "Women will like what I tell them to like."
Yes, yeah, absolutely, and that seems to be the way. And unfortunately, also there's a lot of women cheering it on as well. It's like a complete, you know, this movement would not have got as far as it did without the very privileged women cheering it on, who feel that they have no need of the safeguards that are protecting other people. You know, so it's it's a depressing situation.
Somehow they've also convinced a lot of people that trans people are this sort of magical creature that is incapable of any bad behavior. You know, the thought that someone would go into a bathroom and assault a woman, just for some reason they can't imagine it, that a trans person would do this.
And and it's because of they've done an incredible thing. There's an incredible piece of sleight of hand, which is they've created this false group called trans people. You know, there is the word trans people covers far too many people for it to be a useful phrase. It's like it covers young girls who have dysphoria and are cutting their breasts off, and it also covers Eddie Izzard, who has nothing to do with these young girls, whose experience is completely different, who is merely a cross-dresser, you know? The idea that, oh, it's like this huge umbrella of people who are all the same, it's not true. And examining it in a, you know, with any kind of level-headedness makes you realize it's not true immediately, you know? There was something else I was going to say about that, but it's jumped out of my head again. Sorry.
Well, Graham, you know, we've been talking for a long time now, and you know, the elephant in the room is the second part of your wonderful book, which I want everyone to read, which is your activism and your campaigning for women, the rights of women and girls, and you know, I wish we had more time to get into that, but we've selfishly talked about all these things that we wanted to talk about.
Well, no, like it's great for me because people don't realize that that's the vast majority of the book. You know, like this stuff that happened to me only happened in the last 30% of my life.
And
it's
look, and I just want to say, like, you know, the work you're doing is incredible, and you do stand alone in what you've given up for this fight, and it's real. And we've spoken to all of the people that you know, and you know, you're so highly regarded by them and us in this fight. And but the question I have is, you know, I guess I want to know about the future, because are you going to have this Cincinnatus moment, you know, where, you know, this is a Roman statesman who when the enemies were vanquished and the battle was done, went back to his farm. We want you back on the farm, and
I know I want to go back on the farm too.
And you are, you know, you have made so many people, you know, in so many generations. You've given us so much joy. And I really want you to keep doing that. And it's not my place to ask you to keep doing that, but I need you to keep doing that. And so, so how does the future look? We need to get you back doing sitcoms. How does this happen?
Well, I am thinking of an idea at the moment. I've got a title, which I don't want to say because it's one of those titles that it's actually a pitch within the title, and it's perfect. And every time I tell it to people, they bark with laughter. I'll tell you when we finish recording. But I don't have a premise quite yet. And once I do, I don't know what I might try and farm actors who've been cancelled, or try and do it as a podcast, or do something that means that I can kind of circumvent the usual people who are trying to, stop me from working. So yeah, I'm not against it. I guess my immediate, I tell you what I'm having at the moment. I'm having all the usual problems with coming up with a new idea, which is, you just need to make sure premise is right, the characters bounce off each other, all that sort of thing. At the moment, all I've got is a title and a kind of approach that I want to take. But I'm hopeful that the process will work and I'll end up with something that I can shop around. By the way, can I just say, because this is going out in America, can I just say, whoever wrote Mr. In Between, thank you. I don't know if you guys watch it, but I just thought it was
the Australian
brilliant.
show, you mean?
Yes. I thought it was fantastic. And that guy, we were talking about Jack Nicholson earlier, but he seems to me like the kind of, Australian son of Jack Nicholson.
It's a great story because I saw it many, many years ago when it was a movie called The Magician. So it started as a movie called The Magician, and it was basically, I was a bit down on it because it come from, 90s cinema like you. So I was like, oh man, this is just man bites dog. This is bullshit, that old French movie. But then it's actually very good. But then the genius of it is that they turned it into this FX, the greatest channel ever, FX, turned it into this show. And it's just gets totally no play here in Australia.
Does it not?
No, it's just the stuff we love here and, Mr. In Between is just not mentioned.
Really, that blows me away. I just thought it was perfect. Really loved it. So yeah. Anyway,
well, before we wrap things up here, Graham, we do have a final question that we ask all of our guests, and we'd like to know what you're reading right now.
Oh gosh, well, I'm reading a book. I've been reading. Yeah, I'm mentioning this in too many podcasts, which is why people will realize I've been reading it for about a year. But it's Eric Hoffer's The True Believer, which was written in 1953 and was his attempt. He was like this, I think he was a longshoreman who literally taught himself how to think. And he wrote a book about what connects mass movements, from Nazism to communism to Christianity. And he kind of talks about the stages they go through, the type of people they attract, the world it needs to be to create this mass movement and all that sort of thing. Anyway, could have been written yesterday about the trans movement. It's fascinating. Everything I read that applies to these old movements applies to the trans movement. Middle class, it's a middle class movement. It's nihilistic. It's all about creating a utopia. It's all sorts of things that keep ringing the bell every time in every chapter. It's great. I highly recommend it.
I'll have to check that out. You mentioned it on another podcast and I wrote it down, so I will have to definitely check that out.
Yeah, it's really good.
But Graham, look, thanks for being so generous with your time. We could talk all day with you, and it's just been an absolute pleasure, and we really appreciate what you're doing out there.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Nice to talk about comedy for a change.
Thank you for listening to the New Flesh podcast. If you like our work, please consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or even writing us a review. It really does help the show reach a wider audience. We'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, long live the New Flesh.